Hello, Wednesday, 7 o'clock. We are DebateSensei. I'm Jared Kabika Miller, debate coach and professor of communications. This is Tim Seavey from Visolutions.
How's it going?
All right. So all right. When we decided upon topics, well, I was thinking the national tournaments that aren't happening. And so just recently, we just passed the NFA weekend that it was supposed to happen. And so there's a lot of business that they're supposed to take care of at that tournament as well. And so I was thinking about them. And so I wanted to talk about the LD topic that, well, at least the topic area that came out on March 1st. And there should be ballots going around right now with 5 different potential resolutions on them and people voting on it. And we get it back in the summer. And then the whole cycle starts over again. So we're going to talk about that. The immigration, the topic area is immigration, and so the first thing I want to talk about is what do you think about the topic area?
I think that it's going to change. I think the harm story is going to change tournament by tournament pretty drastically. Like, we've got an election happening in the middle of this upcoming season with generally the Republican Party saying like immigration is one of the number one polling issues. Like, it's going to be pretty contentious. And I think like that's going to just put a huge research burden on debaters. So probably a good thing. It'll keep it super fresh. I think, with some topics like space race and stuff can get a little drier. I think this will stay hot all year long. So,
now that you mention it, like no matter what happens next year, it's like immigration, you're going to have to like do 2 rounds of research. Now, I know most people, do an ongoing sort of research burden, but there's a lot of schools that, they do a big old research burden up front. Sure. And they switch it up right before nationals. And I understand it. It's totally fine. But it would seem like the election, no matter what, is going to change all of your inherency evidence.
Oh, substantially. Yeah. I think it'd be kind of cool. I mean, it's always fun when you see in extemp, where you see in various, parley rounds and things, that plans that people are proposing end up actually happening. So, Congress will put forth, such and such a plan or something that's pretty close to it. So it could be kind of unfortunate for debaters that write really cool cases that end up actually happening. But I think that may be the case. Like, I think one way or another, we'll see some pretty substantial policy shift in the area of immigration anyways. So I think that's going to do a lot to just change what the link story and what the harm stories are going to be. So I think it'll keep LD competitors on their toes for the entire year.
All right, take a look at the other topics that were voted on. Okay, check
honorable mentions here.
Yeah. So Africa, Aid, and Middle East, they were second, and just by a few points, man. It was really close. And I'll be honest with you, I think all 3 of these topics, including immigration, are kind of all touch upon the same thing: refugees. And I think that I think that's an indication that like the refugee problem is like the biggest sort of humanitarian crisis that we need to address.
Sure.
Like all 3, like it just seems like that. What else we got? Central Asia. Like I really don't know much about that.
Artificial intelligence, I'm surprised, didn't do as well. It could be that just we had a very tech-heavy year, and then last year with cybersecurity, they're like, we're sick of debating tech.
Yeah, I think and infrastructure, you see that too. I think that's kind of both might be suffering from the same sort of things there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Social services, that is broad.
Yeah, I wonder what the final sort of, I don't know. I didn't check out the topic papers. That's something you want to do, like what they're going for and stuff like that. Oh, I mean, I think that's a really good resource actually, just for debaters in general, and especially parley debaters. You know what I mean? It's like, you just got handed, at least 5 different cases with evidence,
right,
and everything. You know what I mean? Disadvantages and stuff like that to it. I think,
yeah, for sure.
I wish there was a lot more information.
Yeah, I think the wording of it, assumingly they'll probably do U.S. immigration, and a lot of discussion will be the southern border. But I think depending on how broad they keep it, you might end up with a lot more interesting international immigration topics. So, given that they're doing so much, discussion of refugee crises, I'm thinking it may not necessarily be just the immigration debates that most people would think of on the news all the time about the U.S. southern border.
Yeah, I wonder if they would do that. I wonder if they would do something a little bit more international, because the topic paper was very U.S. focused. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like the assumption was that it was U.S. immigration policy
Yeah.
that being altered or discussed or anything like that. But yeah,
Sure.
I think, man, if they got, I don't know, if NFA LD sort of governing body would do that.
I can't remember the last time we've had an, honest to God, international resolution or resolution that did not have to do with the USFG. So I think that would be, I don't know, I think that would be fun. I think that'd be interesting. Like, it would probably put the neg at a huge disadvantage, but even still, I think it would broaden a lot of areas of discussion, and I think research would go wider.
Here, take a look. I got those old topics right here. So last year it was Cyber Command, and then police misconduct. That was domestic. Cyber Command is still domestic. Latin America. That was the last one, really.
Yeah.
16, 17. So, but it's still like USFG should do this in Latin America. Yeah.
I mean, even when was the last time they did something that the actor was not G? I think, is that?
I don't know. All of them so far, all the way down. Yeah. Oh, the U.S. Department of Education.
There you go.
Okay, UN.
And then UN in 1995. Wow. So it's been a little while. I think that's a ripe topic for just a little permutation on it. I think that'd be interesting to do some body other than the USFG.
Yeah, I just don't know if, because the thing is, those ballots have already gone out, right?
Sure. Well, so assumingly it is going to be just the actual US. I think that some of the topic areas, so the easy, straightforward runs, right, are going to come down to things like detention facilities. Will come to things like refugee and asylum. I imagine more than just immigration through the southern border, probably having to do with ports. And then I think some of the common topics are like H-1B visas and like brain drain issues of, stealing, skilled workers from other countries and things, or at least some of the issues that can come up around that. So I think it's probably safe to go with some of the more common topics, but I think given how heated presidential debates are going to be, I think detention facilities are probably one of the most just immediate, proximal impacts to go for. I'm
wondering what the topic is going to be first, though. You know what I mean? On the topic paper itself, it starts off with 3 general ones where it's restrict immigration. Let me.
I think they're all limit, though. I think all of the.
Yeah, that was interesting, right?
Yeah, it all should limit restrictions on.
Yeah, reduce restrictions on legal immigration, temporary immigration, or just reduce restrictions on immigration.
Yeah, and that's I honestly hadn't given as much thought to temporary immigration as a subject, but I was just reading up on so Bernie's platform on immigration. He was pretty regularly complimented by GOP candidates and very conservative think tanks and things for his immigration policy because he was so staunchly against temporary workers. And any immigration policy that was in support of increasing access or increasing the length of time that temporary workers could stay. And I don't think that's to say that it was necessarily a conservative policy, but they interpreted it as, and at least the way that Bernie posed it, was that it's about protecting workers in the United States, not temporary workers. And I think that it's probably a little bit more nuanced argument, something to the effect of temporary workers are the most easily abused, most vulnerable, most easily manipulated, most easily targeted populations, right? It's so easy to skirt all kinds of benefits to them. So it's actually some of the worst of the worst offenses happen against temporary workers. So either be a full visa or nothing kind of a policy, which I think maybe makes more sense. But that may be a worthwhile discussion, given that even within very progressive circles, there's some factioning around temporary worker immigration rights.
Yeah, and I've noticed that the resolutions for NFALD seem to be, at least they really attempt to like really put parameters on it. You know what I mean? It's like we're just going to talk about this, and so it's not. Yeah, you know what I mean. Like the I think the limiting Latin America using U.S. Southern Command
Hmm.
is, it kind of limits like what policies you can talk about, right?
Sure.
Just to a degree. I'm sure I know that there was a lot of creativity on that topic, but at the same time, you know, it, the research burden kind of changed, you know, based off of that one actor in there,
Sure.
and so um, it seems like, I don't know. I think that if I was going to guess, I think that they would go for that temporary immigration in the U.S. You know what I mean? Like to make the research a little bit more directed at a sort of subset or a subcategory of the immigration topic than the whole thing in and of itself. You know?
So I guess we can all expect to sit through minimum of 6 topicalities on the definition of temporary every
Yeah.
single tournament.
I mean, because I'm wondering, like, what type of ground would be limited by if you focus on temporary immigration? Like, would asylum not be, that wouldn't be a temporary immigration policy, huh?
No, no, or path to citizenship also would not be um, changing the restrictions on temporary. So I feel like there may be, I think there's probably more meat in that debate. Like there's a lot more, I think, that is undiscussed in amongst temporary immigration.
Yeah,
But I think that there's probably more substantial impacts in changes to the path to citizenship. So discussion of like, current, even just straight like misconduct and manipulation of the system, as well as like artificial barriers to entry and all kinds of exclusive, things and policies that are put in place. So
yeah,
I would hope that they would go for something more long term, but temporary could be the case. I would imagine, if it goes temporary, they will probably set the definition of temporary in the resolution. So in the past, like it seemed like they haven't included very many nebulous keywords besides substantially, right?
yeah,
Like they use substantially all the time, but they usually don't use a lot of nebulous terms like that or interpretable terms like that, just knowing that topicality is going to become such an issue. So I appreciated, like with last year, instead of saying like renewable energy sources, they listed out like these are the 5 or 6 different energy sources that you can go to. So pick one of these. And I think that that gives a much more clear-cut ground for the negative to prep against, but also some parameters on what the policy should be. So I would hope they would say like immigration shorter than 3 years, immigration visas shorter than X years, and actually define it.
yeah. I mean, like, what as always happens, even when you try to put limits on it, you still find a way.
Sure.
You know, yeah, like you still find a way. It's like, all right, I'm going to reduce the restrictions on temporary workers by increasing permanent asylum. You know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
so I'm sure that like they find a way around that, which makes me think that like people are going to be talking about any pet immigration policy that they want to talk
Sure.
about. H-1B was the persuasion winner at the last NIET.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Or was I hope I'm getting the classification right, but it was uh, but about the sort of relationships of immigrants and wives and stuff like that, and all the sort of gender implications on like if a husband gets fired or divorced or something like that, and he's the one who holds the immigration sort of status, then it gets revoked from his wife, and it's like, oh my
Wow.
god, it's like yeah, there's an insane sort of um, like really specific type of immigration that would definitely be a really good sort of material to talk about. I mean, and she did such a great. You can check out the final rounds of the NIET.
Yeah.
She just had just a phenomenal speech about it. It was, the topic was just amazing. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
she deserved all the accolades she got for it.
Nice. Well, that's I mean, on the subject of policies that are really worth discussing, I think sometimes those things happen, right? Like as we were discussing, like sometimes a policy is pretty close to what the actual end product happens to be. I don't feel like that's all that common that we see in rounds, though. I think that one of the more frequent things you'll see in a debate round are pretty sweeping or pretty, I would say, like bold progressive policies.
Oh,
And the intention is to be, jarring or like really different from the status quo, right? So, for example, open all borders is a really common policy that you will hear proposed in parley rounds that are discussions of immigration. So, if a parley round gets the topic of change immigration policy, I feel like I see open borders pretty frequently run as a policy, and oftentimes I don't think that it's the case that Washington would actually pass something like that, but the discussion comes like there's oftentimes the counter argument in there like, well, that's never going to happen. It's too radical. And the discussion is like, no, we need to have discussions of radical policy in debate land, because then we can actually determine the merits of what is legitimate and what is just appeasement and like really weak, half-assed policies that are instead oftentimes proposed because like, well, we got to propose something that will pass. And so we make, Clinton era welfare changes that are just like sad, nothing little policy adjustments.
Yeah.
And it doesn't actually solve a problem. So how do you feel about those cases? Those ones that are really far from what's likely to actually pass, but that are discussions of much more broad sweeping change in policy?
Well, I like them. There's very few things that I don't like because I've seen it run well in one form or another, right? And like I say a lot, it's usually the problem is that you just don't see enough good cases like that. But this is almost the opposite. You don't see very many of them, and when you do, they typically are pretty good because there's a certain level of confidence that comes with advocating something like that. I think that academic debate round is probably the best place for it to happen, because you're really interrogating something that's really bold. And in the end, the best thing that happens is that you kind of create a much more sophisticated personal opinion on how you feel about how we treat borders and how they ought to be treated and where you stand on it. I think I think they're good. And like in the topic paper that won the immigration topic for NFA-LD has open borders evidence already in it, and I think, and so I mean, they cut a card, but there's a lot of other things that are, it's just interesting. You don't hear it that often. I think that like giving a venue to explore something that you just don't hear that often, at least good reasons for it. And yeah, it's a good thing. But I also think that like there's no way that you're going to avoid a capitalism critique, because you're talking about the temporary immigration would probably be even more susceptible to a critique like that. A big fraud, you know what I mean? So
yeah, I think that's an area of discussion that really needs more investigation. And I would hope that, I think one of the cool things, particularly about NFA-LD, is it is a little more, I think, nationally broad. I think parliamentary debate tends to get pretty regionally slanted, right? Or like a little bit of an echo chamber of like, these are the kinds of cases that you see run in most Southern California debates. And then you go to like, even like a Fire Pie or something like that and see it outside, like, oh, this is what they're doing in the Midwest, or this is what they're doing in, Texas, or this is what they're doing in, the East Coast. Or you go to bigger four-year nationals. And I just think you see a greater breadth of case discussion. So I like that about LD, and I think part of it comes from the topic. So hopefully this one, goes in a similar direction. So I would hope that there's more discussion of pretty like broad sweeping policies on either side. So I was just reading before we came on here, like on the topic of detention facilities, given all of the, COVID related stuff that's happening right now, detention is down to like fewer than 100 people at the border, where it was up north of 20,000 at its peak. So not a good thing, I think, by most stretches. Like most people could probably say like, not that like detention was a good thing, but instead policies just become totally draconian. Like if you were at the border, you were deported. Like if you are here, you must be here for a reason. And therefore, people, being just sent back to the country of origin. So pretty messy. And I think a lot of issues that will be discussed after all of the current dumpster fire of news and like all the other awful things that are happening right now. Once that story calms down, I think we'll get a lot more about what's going on behind the scenes. So how other things that were previously dominant on the news, how those stories are actually playing out, just given the current circumstance of things, because people are much more compliant and much more willing to accept really intense policies they normally would otherwise reject when they're super afraid and about following authority. So I think we'll probably see a lot of discussion of what happened there and probably get to do some analysis on what happens under the most draconian, extreme conservative immigration policies. So I think there may be some more unique harm stories that we have seen actually played out as opposed to just theoretical ones.
All right, we got ourselves a comment here from Charles. Can you help me with disads? Hey, Charles, help me out. Are you talking about in general or disads for the immigration topic? Regardless, I'm going to jump into, let's use that as a nice little transition, okay, into disads that we might have on this one. And so the first one that I saw is called brain drain. If anyone who doesn't know, brain drain is when high skilled individuals migrate from their origin country to the United States, and that decimates the origin country's workforce and economy. Now, okay, so Charles, here's how the disad goes, right? Is that you start off with a uniqueness that there's a certain country that uniquely needs certain like a level of technical know-how, and the link is that the United States sucks all those people to the country through education incentives and through paying jobs and stuff like that. It takes it away from these other countries, and those other countries continue into this cycle of poverty that they're experiencing because they never have the sort of technological innovation that fuels the U.S. economy to a certain degree.
Yeah. So common uniqueness there is like the energy infrastructure in India is way behind where it should be. So India has been developed, has the money, has the tools that it should be way further along with a very stable power grid, but they're still facing constant, infrastructural issues. And part of that they attribute to how many H-1B visas suck away their top talented engineers and scientists to the US. So you end up with, college professors and industry experts in the US, not, people. So they're not helping their nation of origin. They're instead being pulled away to the US. So that's the disad on H-1B visas, like the brain drain, but like more specific example that has a lot of impacts to where like other countries are kind of left behind. And it creates this kind of compression of power and consolidation of power and brain power, more specifically, only in really rich countries. And that has all kinds of, damaging impacts to other countries' BRICS typically.
So, yeah. So disads in general, you have to think about disadvantages as tragedies, okay? Tragic stories. And they follow the same sort of arc as a tragedy, where you start with the setting, which is the uniqueness. And that would be these BRIC countries that Tim was talking about. And you give background about the situation that they're in and talk about how important it is to have technology sectors so they can grow with the rest of the world. That's one. Okay, you start there, and then the link is the policy, whatever immigration policy it is. And this is when you get good at prepping disads, you should be able to have disads that link, no matter what it is. Yeah, you know what I mean. That they have, at least there's some flexibility in the link story, right? You're just listening for that link during their speech, and if you don't hear it, then you try to get it during cross-ex. All right, and so you start with, all right, there's these countries, they need technology. What do you do for H-1B visas? What does your policy do? How does that affect high tech? How does it affect the people that with those things and with high skills? And then as soon as you find that out, either through cross-ex or through their case about what it does to high-skilled laborers in their countries of origin, you now can get into the internal link. It's like, all right, so there's this trade-off, and it like displaces people, and therefore these advancements never happen. These BRIC countries that are trying to economically develop have difficulty doing that. The more that United States sort of entices people away from them, so that goes the uniqueness, the link, that was the internal link, and so the impact is the cycle of poverty is the impact, right? Or at least that's one of the ways that I kind of phrase it. You might have something with a bitter sort of brink story, so it's not so linear. But.
And if you're talking in high school debate, because it looks like Charles, that's what you're mentioning. In high school, it's fairly similar and becoming more policy-esque. But when you're having even value debates, with the value criterion of how you go about getting there, so long as they've set up a fair value and a fair value criterion, you're still doing the exact same thing as Jared was saying. You're just instead linking it to what bad things their advocacy is going to create. So they are not actually fulfilling their value based on the things that they're supporting. So one of the more, I think, common and useful ones in the immigration discussion is that it's easy to go for a small policy, or it's easy to go for a little very specific immigration policy, and you can make a good story and point out how that doesn't fulfill their value with a Band-Aid on a bullet wound argument. So Band-Aid on a bullet wound is kind of like a broader topic of argument, saying that if a policy doesn't do enough, everyone is going to be so bored discussing and fighting and bickering over this thing. A good example is like healthcare policy right now. Everyone fought and fought and fought over it until we end up with this watered down, mushy garbage policy that was worse than it was even before, right? That's a Band-Aid on a bullet wound, that you're doing some little solution, but it actually masks the greater issue, doesn't solve it, and if anything, just allows it to fester and get worse in the background. So it only feels like you're doing something. It looks like you've got a Band-Aid, but in actuality, you've got a much more serious problem going on that's not being addressed. So that's how they wouldn't be fulfilling their greater value, by doing whatever their policy is.
Can you have, so Swishfish here asks a question, can you have a value sort of like in LD in a policy debate? Okay, I think first up, you're allowed to do anything you want in debate, people, okay? It's whether or not you can justify it, okay? And you got to be thinking about, and you're like, how do I justify it? Think in the end, will this increase the chances that the judge will vote for me? I know it's like really, really basic and simple, but that's what you need to think about, because that will open up your creativity when it comes to applying things like values in debate, right? And you say, maybe in this one thing, we do need to focus in on a specific value. And we're like, what I would do is I would just package it in your criteria, right? Rather than just saying, hey, our criteria is net benefits, and just moving on. Like, be creative about how do you know who wins. It's like at the end of this debate, if there are more people that are experiencing more freedom, you vote for us. And if there's less people, so like you don't declare the value to be freedom, and then you have a criteria like a good little debate robot. You know what I mean? It's like you just kind of artfully compose it in a way that makes sense and still gives you that sort of outcome that you're looking for, which is a focused issue like freedom, safety, things like that.
That's like the tactical recommendation there is, right? Like in a value round, you still have your value criterion anyways. In policy, they've kind of ported that over. You have your criteria, you can make more specific. But Jared, I think we talked about it on a previous video, having a thesis at the top. So instead of starting your case with just like, let me read the resolution that everyone already has memorized, start with a bold thesis. Because the affirmative team believes that water is a basic human right. Because the negative team feels that freedom of movement is more important than capitalist growth. Whatever. Like, set something that is kind of an immutable ground that you stand on, that you are going to defend throughout this debate. And so long as you and your partner, assuming it's a partner debate, are sticking on that same theme, or even if it's just one person sticking on that same theme, if you get a good consistent story throughout that thing, it doesn't matter what you call it, that will most often win over someone that just has like a random collection of research that maybe they or maybe their team put together. If you've got a good, clear thesis running throughout your case, you'll probably do really well.
Yeah, and so I used to make my first argument the value argument, and it wouldn't just be like this sort of assertion, this is what we value, I dare you to challenge me on it. It was kind of like that human beings deserve to choose where they live. Just put that out there. And then you have and that would be a really basic claim that you're making, right? But then you have really good evidence to explain why it is. And this is where critical sort of information starts coming in. This is where you might put a little open borders talk right in there. Okay. And so, and that open borders talk that you can put in there, and then you can move into, and then you get into the harms and inherency, which is required for you. And then you get into your solvency. And so I think that you don't need to put in your resolutional analysis, here's the value. I think that you can get into the debate and just argue the value, you know what I mean? And just say, listen, it's what we need to focus on. And so if you do that, then you can do, So what do we got here? We have
both of our comments were coming from incoming high school debaters. So awesome. Glad you're enjoying the content with it. There's not a substantial, obviously Jared and I are both, coaches at the collegiate level, but we've helped a lot of people beyond that and worked with high school and stuff before. The only, I think, major difference between the two is that college becomes a little bit more technical and a little more, I think, structured at some levels, but high school policy is still super detailed on that.
Yeah.
I think the messages that we've been saying from the beginning permeate whatever form of debate you choose to do at whatever level. Having a strong thesis, a strong narrative throughout your case of why you are solving a bigger, more important problem, and you're doing it better and more effectively, and following, all the base stock issues of debate better than the other side. You don't have to worry about, well, I've got a card that beats that card.
Yeah.
You are a better debater if you can argue those points. It's about getting the judge to vote for you, not about here's the squirrely tactics to make this thing linked to whatever. You'll get that over time. Having a good, solid narrative and a good, firm thesis, I think, is most important.
Yeah, I went to Long Beach during the time when they were doing their project, their hip hop project, in the early 2000s, and they were able to have really interesting critical arguments. They qualified for the NDT, and they were just brilliant. They were just brilliant individuals who were able to do all the things without having to read blisteringly fast. Don't get me wrong, I appreciate the blisteringly fast. I do have. If both sides are willing to go for it, that's fine. But when I was watching high school policy, the only difference I saw in high school and college policy was the topic. All right, and so so we have one last question, and we're run a little long here, but that's all right. How can you prep for the higher levels? Is there any specific things you should learn first or last? Oh, man, if I'm going to,
yeah, just as a one shot, how do you learn how to debate as one single
answer? Okay, so first thing is start knowing your judges on another level. That's the first thing. That's the weird thing that you don't always look into, right? Is start keeping a catalog of these people. You might already be doing that, but honestly, knowing your audience is always the first place you start. Always the first place you start.
When you're taking judge feedback at the end of a round, you'll notice the teams that don't win all that often are the ones that hear the feedback and just go, yeah, whatever, stupid decision, or yeah, we totally won, and they're like packing up their crap to go, and that was all they heard. No, you take detailed notes, flow the feedback you get from judges. Yeah. They will remember that.
You and talking with them and interacting. You know what I mean? Like during tournaments and stuff like that. Don't make it creepy, but understanding who is watching you in the back of the round is honestly that's the secret. Okay. Now, the thing that isn't a secret that everyone knows is you have to live a lifestyle as a debater, and so what that means is that information is something that is incredibly valuable to you, and you got to learn how to consume it well and all the time. And so you got to avoid the empty calories when it comes to information. So bad news sources you're staying away from, good news sources you're gravitating towards, and you have to do it just more often. And so that means giving up certain things, the empty calories being video games and TV. Those are good. Don't stop doing that. You know what I mean? But you might have to balance that out. And that usually is the key to being the higher level, is like thinking about it as in terms of almost like mental health,
Sure. Doing more of it, practicing like with your partner and against other good teams. And I think we've got this really interesting, cool, unique opportunity right now where everyone is at home. There are more and more online debates than I have ever seen coming up. So like there are just Reddit pages dedicated to debate and engaging in good quality debates and like sticking still with like fundamental argument structure and having good warrants and having, justifiable arguments and rejoinder following through with consistent argumentation. Like those things don't go away when you're outside of an academic debate round. So practicing that in everyday life certainly helps with it. But and on the question that came with critiques, I think we've had a couple of videos about that subject, but we can always circle back on that maybe at a later time.
Yeah. Listen, go ahead and feel free to post comments. All right. And we may use that for next week's topics, or we may just start a conversation on it. Okay. Go to the Facebook page, the DebateSensei Facebook page, and post comments there. on social media. And if you want me to address any positions in particular, all right, or if you want Tim to, like send us, like let us know, all right, like leave some comments, give us some sort of contact, and let us know the things that you want us to tackle, and we'll absolutely do that. All right.
Discussions of the Beaudry arcade. That's what's coming up. Like that, the oldest school, like dusted off from the debate archives, sent around and passed through every team that's ever been critique. So yeah, good stuff. We could totally discuss that.
All right. Hey, yeah. So let us know. All right. We love doing discussions about debate and everything like that, and we want to know what you want to talk about. So leave us some comments. Subscribe to our stuff. And we will see you again next week. All right. We have Tim CV here from Dissolutions. I am Jared Kubika Miller, debate coach and professor of communications. We are DebateSensei. Matt Shapiro is out getting his haircut today. We will see y'all next week, and hopefully you got some stuff for us to talk about, everybody. Okay. See you then.
See ya.